is in conflict with what the immanent worldview is dictating for you to do, where the law of the land orders you to do something, but you know a transcendent moral law would be at unease with what it is you're having to do. I cannot imagine leading a more schizoid life than being in that. So however you do it, all I want you to know is that we thank God you're there, because we do need that perspective. We do need that legitimate tension. And so I want to talk to you about the points of tension in the whole arena of secularism today and what it means. I remember in the 1970s when I was new in Canada. When I was 20 years old, my father, who was a civil servant and had given his entire life to working for the Indian government and rose to pretty high levels of prominence out there, became a very recognized name in India. He encouraged my older brother Ajit, who was 22 and I was 20. He found a way to get us over to Canada. India was struggling with its economic issues, and he said, I don't know how you boys will do out here. The least I'd like to do for you is get you the best of education, but let's move you to Canada and maybe you could settle down there and gradually the rest of us will come. So we moved to Toronto, Canada. I was 20 and my brother Ajit was 22. My family is all settled there now. My parents are buried in Toronto. They died quite young. My mom was in her 50s when she passed away, just shortly after she arrived in Canada. And 5 years after that, we lost my dad. But my 4 brothers and sisters, myself, 5 of us, 4 of them live in Toronto or the Niagara area, and I now make my home in Atlanta, Georgia. That backdrop was important for me to mention to you, that in the 60s, that cultural revolution that was underway was really uprooting what Western culture was all about. I don't think we realized the ramifications of how deep-seated that cultural change was before our eyes. In fact, in the 1980s, the famed Francis Schaeffer was speaking at one of the universities in Toronto, and I was a young undergraduate student, and I was listening to him speak, and I'll never forget him making a comment that he believed the day was going to come in the West where if you mentioned the name of Jesus Christ, an average young person would have no knowledge of making even one factual statement about the person of Jesus Christ. And I thought, is he saying this for dramatic effect, or does he really think this is true? But he and Everett Koop were doing that tour at that time on their book, How Shall We Then Live? And you know, I think it is turning out to be very much a possibility. Here's what I want to position my talk to you on, and it is culture, its upheavals, and what happens to a transcending perspective in the process. Daniel Bell, the great anthropologist, said this: culture is an effort to find a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all of us in the passage of our lives. Culture is an effort to find a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all of us in the passage of our lives. Now notice the assumption in the definition that coherence was something to be pursued in definition. I'm not even sure the postmodern mindset would agree with that pursuit anymore. In fact, at the University of Iowa, when I was talking about coherence in one of my thoughts, a student went up to the microphone and said, "Who in the world told you that our answers needed to be coherent?" She said, "Is this not another Western approach? A hegemony of dominating the rest of the world with its pursuit of coherence?" And she was waxing quite eloquent and pretty hostile in her posture, so I just let her talk. And I waited and I said, "Can I ask you a question? When I'm answering your question, do you want my answer to be coherent, or may I be incoherent?" She just stood there stunned for a moment, and it hit her like a new revelation that in her demands upon others, she wanted coherence. In her own rights in her life, she was quite willing to be incoherent. So culture is an effort to find a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all of us in the passage of our lives. Now here's the important point Daniel Bell makes, that a cultural revolution is underway Listen carefully now. A cultural revolution is underway when we depart from the shared meanings of the past on the most important questions of life's purpose and destiny. When we depart from the shared meanings of the past on the questions of purpose and destiny, a cultural revolution is underway, and it was underway in the 60s, and we are now reaping the benefits of that in this new century and this new millennium. And the average American today doesn't even know how to answer the fundamental question of what it means to be human. Take a look at Stephen Hawking's movie. The movie on Stephen Hawking, I should say, The Theory of Everything. I don't know how many of you have seen it. Quite remarkable, actually not quite accurate in his marital issues. And when I saw that, that was my first reaction, because I studied at Cambridge and had the privilege of hearing him sometimes. And I thought, this is not exactly the way the story was. So I immediately Googled, as soon as I got off the plane, I was talking to my colleague. So The Theory of Everything, critique on accuracy. And the newspapers in England were abuzz with the fact of how they glossed over some of those very personal issues. That's fine. But here's what I want to say to you. Can you really have a theory of everything without knowing everything? And if you know everything, you are claiming omniscience. But that's the very person they're denying actually exists. Now let us suppose he comes up with the theory of everything. The counterintuitive nature of his scientific underpinnings is so evident in two things. Number one, Stephen Hawking would never have made it without two realities: the love of his fellow human being and a designing engineer who gave him that speech synthesizer to be able to speak. And so the designer and love are two realities that cradled him for all these decades. But those are the very two realities. One he has to deny metaphysically, the other he denies physically, that you can have all these processes, but you don't have to have a designer. The two converging realities that upheld his life are categories he doesn't know how to go to ultimately in design and in the metaphysical reality of love. I don't know how he'd answer that. And the closing line of the movie actually gives the counterintuitiveness of it all. He looks at his first wife, Jane, and watches the children coming down into the garden at Buckingham Palace. And his closing line of the movie is, "Look what we have made." Look what exploded into being. You didn't make it. If you do not believe that your own life had a maker, and you do not believe that the universe had a maker, and you believe the laws of science, from the strong force to the weak force, to the force of gravity and so on, the electromagnetic force, of all of these forces are the only things that brought life into being, and determinism is unavoidable, and your very children are also ultimately only in the process of time plus matter plus chance. You didn't make them. Fascinating how science collides with philosophy. And he made a cardinal blunder in his book, The Grand Design, on page 5, when he said philosophy is dead. Wow, when he said that, and I studied philosophy at Cambridge, and he said that at Cambridge University. Theologians didn't have to go after him, the philosophy department did. And they went good and hard, and Hawking had to silence himself on that. Imagine telling an institution, one of the most prestigious philosophy departments, that your discipline is dead. And the chairman of the philosophy department said, maybe the oracular Professor Hawking has not kept up with our discipline as much as we have with his, and it's time for him to take note. How did this all come about with the scientific single vision of life? Three things happened. Three philosophical moods were extended. First was secularization. What is secularization? Secularization is the process by which religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. We repeat that. Secularization is the process by which religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. So it's time-laden, it's a process. It is society-laden, where the interpretations in society have lost what you would call plausibility structure. The arguments of faith are no longer plausible in this kind of society. And it is readily visible if you're discussing some moral issue of our time, and experts are on the platform and debating it, and you have a university president, you have a lawyer, you have a psychologist, you have a psychiatrist, you have somebody who is strong in politics, all of the disciplines somehow represented on the platform, plus a reverend so-and-so. You can be sure that the average person in the audience will assume that the reverend is prejudiced and predictable. The rest of them are objective and have done their homework. That religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. They've forgotten that it was reverends actually that brought about some of the finest universities in this country. All the way from Yale and Princeton and so on, they were brought about by people who were men of the cloth, who believed academic excellence needed to be pursued. The first motto of Harvard University, Veritas Christo e Ecclesia, truth for Christ and the church. Now Christo e Ecclesia is removed, and Veritas stands with its feet firmly planted in midair. There's no truth for, there's no truth from, it is self-referencing definitions. What happens with secularism? Now, first let me say this to be sure. Like Winston Churchill said of democracy, democracy is the worst form of government except for all other forms of government. Secularism is really the way a government ought to ultimately build its limited capacity on. You can't have a forced religious worldview. Europe committed suicide when it enforced religion, and ultimately both society and religion died in politics and religion died a natural death, and you have a completely different worldview there now. When you force people to pay their taxes to religious authority, when you force people to believe, you are going to be victimized by as much of a demagogic tendency as sometimes may happen in politics. So I'm not asking for a religious worldview to be enjoined and enforced upon people, but secularism needs to be understood in its limits. And if we don't understand it in its limits, then what happens is, here is now what we are witnessing. Let me give you an illustration of this. You see, secularization will lose its way in finding definitions for the most important questions of life, of purpose and destiny, which is what culture is looking for. Let me illustrate this for you as well as I can. When I moved to Atlanta in the 1980s, my wife and family and I made our home in Atlanta since the 1980s. A pornographic entrepreneur was being tried because supposedly his stuff was so perverse that it made Playboy magazine look tame. So I won't even name the guy, but he was being tried. Horrible stuff, I understand. But the man prosecuting him was up against a challenge that the person defending him did not want anybody on the jury who went to belong to a church. He said that people who go to church are prejudiced on pornographic issues, so I want as many people on the jury who do not go to church. And in the South, that became a challenge. It took them many, many weeks till they found the jury. Once they got the jury, the lawyer was brilliant in his questioning. He would look at the witness against his client's material, and he asked a series of questions like this. Have you ever been into an art gallery? Yes, sir. Have you ever been into an art gallery where there are paintings by the grandmasters of art? Yes, sir. Have you ever been there where the paintings are done with disrobed people, Yeah. Will you please explain to this jury why you went in there, paid to go in there, called it art, and you call my client stuff pornography? Now you know as well as I do, the witness is not given equal time in interrogating the attorney. he can't interact with them because these yes and no, none of the above answers type thing is what we do so much of in defining major issues. But if I had that attorney as a friend and sat across a table with him, I'd have a few questions for him like this. I'd say, you know, have you ever read the biography of Michelangelo? Michelangelo went through the same question. When he started painting disrobed people, his teacher took him aside and he said to him, can you tell me why you are doing this? And Michelangelo said, because I want to see man as God sees man. He said, Michael, always remember, you're not God. An incredible stab to give you pause at the purpose of what you are doing, the intent of what you're doing, and the unintended consequences and the offenses that can be wrong. But here's the most important point. C.S. Lewis, when he was looking for the answers to life and who it was that he needed to pursue, went through many, many options, and particularly was enamored by pantheism. And that's where he was going to hang his coat, but he found it didn't have the answers he was looking for. So he wrote a book called A Pilgrim's Regress, not Progress. And the reason he called it a regress was because after he found Jesus Christ, he retraced his steps through all of those other philosophies because he now had the answer to why he said no to the rest of them. And he called it A Pilgrim's Regress. In his book, A Pilgrim's Regress, he has a brilliant argument out there. He is in the spirit of the age, bound in chains. This is an allegory. It's fascinating to me when I read it that in the spirit of the age, to be described as shackled is not exactly what you thought the spirit of the age was all about. The spirit of the age was to unshackle you from any restraint, total freedom. But he pictured himself as shackled. And as he pictures himself as shackled, the mountain representing the spirit of the age brings his breakfast. And he's unshackled to enjoy his breakfast, and he's given a glass of milk, and he said, I made a mistake of commenting on the nature of the milk, saying tasty, nutritious, delicious. And the man representing the spirit of the age started mocking him, saying, nutritious, delicious? Do you know what it is? It's the secretion of a cow. Urine is the secretion of a cow. Milk is the secretion of a cow. You're just calling it nutritious, delicious. Lewis said, I made a bigger blunder then in commenting on the tastiness of the eggs. And I won't even tell you what the man described the eggs to be. I won't insult your intelligence at lunch. Lewis said I was dumbfounded at the analogies he was drawing. He bound me again and left. A few moments later, reason came riding on a horse and rescued me and turned to him who ran the spirit of the age and said to him, Sir, you lie. You don't know the difference between what nature has meant for nourishment and what nature has meant for refuse or garbage. You don't know the difference between what nature has meant for nourishment and what nature has meant for refuse. One of the greatest flaws in logical thinking today, listen to me carefully, is a law that tells you just because two things have one thing in common doesn't mean they have everything in common. Elephants have ears, I have ears, therefore I'm an elephant. They take 2 points of parallel, disregard the scores of the points of dissimilarity, and think they have solved the problem by saying to you, this is the same as A and B. They fail to draw the distinction. Here's what I want to say to you. Nobody ever comes and says their marriage is in trouble because her husband likes to go to the art gallery. But I want you to examine the number of marriages that have been shattered by people who've been enshackled by pornography, where the purpose and intent of the peddler of that stuff is to so plant within you hungers that are ultimately insatiable and give your imagination a desire for things that no one person in the world can ultimately satisfy. There at the heart is the destruction of the home. You see, my daughter, Naomi, she's just yay high. She is in our ministry with a branch of it called Wellspring International. Naomi works with women and children at risk and those who are being trafficked in the sex trafficking industry. She used to work in the White House after graduating from Whedon, and I gave her a call and saw her tender heart and asked her would she be interested in this. She prayed about it, left that position and came. She will go into Amsterdam, Mumbai, Bangkok, Chiang Mai. She goes to these places. She has contacts there, has built homes for rescue. She'll take a purse on her shoulder with the New Testament in that and walk into the little red light district areas of Amsterdam. They know her now. And she says, Dad, I can just about feel the breath of the pet breathing down my shoulder as I'm walking in. When she goes in, they know her, they give her a hug, they'll turn that light off and they'll listen to her and she'll talk to them. And she said she's just about burned out on it. You know, she said, Dad, it's taken such a heavy toll on me. She said to me, Dad, write a book on this subject, on pornography, with me, because I just tell you the way it's shattered lives, the way it's shattered marriages. And I said, honey, I just don't want to mess with that. I don't want to mess with that subject. She said, you write on what the body is intended to be. I will write on the degradation to which it is said. It needs to be done. What I'm saying to you, ladies and gentlemen, is this. The woman who sits in front of the lens of a camera to exploit the titillating fancies of some man on the other end of that viewing and wants to bring some desire and idea into his mind that satisfies him for the moment, whatever it is. The woman who is used for that purpose ought to cover herself and tell the exploiter, don't do this to me. But she won't, because when secularization has had its run, it will produce a generation without a sense of shame. You show me a man without a sense of shame. I'll show you a man with a sword in his hand who can decapitate with boldness and unapologetically and unashamedly. Shame is that thing which God has put into us to remind us that all things cannot be right, some things are wrong. Where does secularism go for its definitions? You see, in the Garden of Eden, God gave us every privilege. Think about it. Do whatever you want, but do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was basically saying, don't play God, don't define good or evil. That's my prerogative. Because on the day that you take of that, you will surely die. Yes, and what happens? We ate of it. We redefined good and evil. Today, every tree is protected, except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's been uprooted. Nobody lays claim to that anymore. It's gone. Secularism has been a dangerous experiment when carried to the extreme of no transcendent moral order. And you give us that kind of a no transcendent moral order, and you will see what Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote about. He said he remembered when he was a little boy the darkness of his home with candles, and his grandfather would be sitting around the table and his parents and family would be sitting, and he said, many a time while I didn't understand what they were saying, my grandfather would end that night and say, it's time to go to bed, but just remember, all of this is happening in our country because we have forgotten God. And Solzhenitsyn said, after writing thousands of pages, after reading tens of thousands of pages, I have come to the same conclusion my grandfather did. He said, my country forgot God, and we paid in the price of millions and millions and millions of people. Can't get away with it. Secular means this worldly in Latin. And if we only live for this world without eternity in perspective, we are walking into a minefield of the most demagogic person who will ultimately be standing in the end and take its toll on us. Secularization, no shame. Pluralization, the second mood, where there's a competing number of worldviews available to its members and no worldview is dominant. A competing number of worldviews available to its members and no worldview is dominant. You know, pluralization is a good thing too. When I came to Canada, I was 20, and there was only one Indian restaurant in Toronto, and it was pathetic. I said, if people eat here and think they've eaten Indian food, they've really deceived themselves. When I got to Canada, there were 500 Indians in Toronto. Today, in Toronto alone, there are 500,000 Indians. In fact, you are more likely to see Indians at the airport than a Caucasian at the airport. That's how dominant this pluralism has become. It's an incredible thing. 500,000 Toronto Indians and 500,000 Chinese in the city of Toronto alone. Pluralism. Pluralization in cuisine has been a wonderful thing. If you go to Los Angeles, you can see a Korean who's got a fast food outlet where he's selling kosher tacos. Marvelous pluralism in cuisine. I love the pluralism of languages. I've learned a few myself. I enjoy talking them. I still keep my Hindi very strong because there are some things I can still say in Hindi that are not actually well translatable in English. My wife's Canadian, and so when we go to India, sometimes somebody will say something and we'll all laugh. I'll say, let me explain it to you. She says, don't bother, it'll lose something in the translation. Because that's the way it is. Because language is laden with memory and experience, and culture is wrapped into language. Language is so critical. Pluralism, language, pluralism, cuisine, all that. But if pluralism is extrapolated into meaning relativism, then you're on a path to destruction again. See, anyone who makes a statement like this, all truth is relative. Think about that statement, all truth is relative. If that statement is true, then that statement itself is not always true. Because it's only making a relative claim. So what relativism actually does in postulating itself is it takes an absolute position while telling you absolutes don't exist, and makes a position on relativism which is actually self-destructive. It doesn't hold. Relativism simply can't be true, but relativism is the way by which we live and order our lives today. And the laws of logic have faltered and broken down at the altar of reality. I could give you many, many illustrations of this, but I think I could just, let me go quickly to the musicians and the philosophers of this. The British journalist Steve Turner says this about our age, tongue-in-cheek he says it. We believe in Marx, Freud, and Darwin. We believe everything is okay as long as you don't hurt anyone, to the best of your definition of hurt and to the best of your definition of knowledge. We believe in sex before, during, and after marriage. We believe in the therapy of sin. We believe that adultery is fun. We believe that taboos are taboo. We believe that everything's getting better despite evidence to the contrary. The evidence must be investigated, and you can prove anything with evidence. We believe there's something in horoscopes, UFOs, and bent spoons. Jesus was a good man, just like Buddha, Muhammad, and ourselves. He was a good moral teacher, although we think some of his good morals were basically bad. We believe that all religions are basically the same, at least the ones that we read were. They all believe in love and goodness. They only differ on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God, and salvation. We believe that after death comes the nothing, because when you ask what comes nothing, because when you ask the dead what happens, they say nothing. If death is not the end and the dead have lied, then it's compulsory heaven for all, excepting perhaps Hitler, Stalin, and Genghis Khan. We believe in Masters and Johnson. What's selected is average, what's average is normal, what's normal is good. We believe in total disarmament. We believe there are direct links between warfare and bloodshed. Americans should beat their guns into tractors, and the Russians would be sure to follow. We believe that man is essentially good. It's only his behavior that lets him down. This is the fault of society. Society is the fault of conditions. Conditions are the fault of society. We believe that each man must find the truth that is right for him, and reality will adapt accordingly. The universe will readjust. History will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth, accepting the truth that there is no absolute truth. We believe in the rejection of creeds and the flowering of individual thought. And then he writes this postscript. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear a state of emergency, sniper kills 10, youths go looting, bomb blasts school, it's but the sound of man worshipping his maker. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear a state of emergency, sniper kills 10, youths go looting, bomb blast school, it's but the sound of man worshipping his maker. You know, it was a Scottish political activist who said, "Let me write the songs of a nation. I don't care who writes its laws. Let me write the songs of a nation. I don't care who writes its laws." And the musicians will often point out the deadly gap between our is and our ought. Cat's foot, iron claw, neurosurgeons scream for more, from paranoia's poison door, 21st century schizoid man. Blood rack, barbed wire, politicians, funeral pyre, innocents raped with napalm fire, 21st century schizoid man. Death seed, blind man's greed, poets starving, children bleed, nothing he's got he really needs, 21st century schizoid man. The walls on which the prophets wrote is cracking at the seams. Upon the instruments of death the sunlight brightly gleams. Will no one lay the laurel wreath while silence drowns the screams? Between the gates of time, seeds of knowledge are sown. And knowledge is a deadly, it goes on to say, that knowledge is a deadly friend when the truth you actually believe is parked somewhere else in your existential. Knowledge is a deadly friend when no one sets the rules. The fate of all mankind, I see, is in the hands of fools. Confusion will be my epitaph as I crawl a cracked and broken path. If we make it, we can all sit back and laugh, but I'm afraid tomorrow I'll be crying. King Crimson, the Rock Room. I'm afraid tomorrow I'll be crying. 21st century schizoid man. Reason is gone. Secularization, no shame. Pluralization, no reason. The last is what? Privatization, where we are told we can believe whatever we want to in our faith, but leave it at home. Don't bring it into the public arena. We sever the connection between true ultimate belief and our public practice. What has that done to our young? It's produced a lack of meaning. The average young person today has no meaning and purpose in life. We are looking at one who ended up that way at the age of 17 when I had no meaning. And I ended up on a bed of suicide, trying to take my own life because I had no meaning. My father was so powerful and he was so embarrassed when he found out I was in a hospital having tried to poison myself. And a Bible was brought to me. My mother's English was not that good, and the person who brought it in was not allowed to stay because I was in intensive care, and he said, "Read this to him." He opened it to John chapter 14, Jesus talking to Thomas. And at one point Jesus said to him, "Because I live, you also shall live." I said, "I don't know what that means. I really don't know what that means." I had no hope, I had no meaning. And in that simple prayer, as I trusted in Jesus Christ to become my Savior and my Lord, the Lord of life, I said, if you're the author of life, that's what I don't have. I'm living biologically. Nobody explained it to me. Nobody. I walked out of there at the age of 17 having prayed and sensing some things of a supernatural promotion and a possibility had taken place in my life. And you know, my dad looked at me and he just said, "What has happened to my son?" Because the doctor looked at me before I left and he said, "Beta," which means son, "I have given you back your life, but I cannot help you to want to live. That has to come from you." I looked at him and said, "That's been taken care of," and it didn't come from me. It came from God himself. When my dad saw me going into theological training, he figured his son's entire life was ruined. India, you build a big career. And you know what happened was, he wouldn't talk to me for about 5 weeks. But finally, he began to see what was happening, and he himself gave his life to Christ. It was the most dramatic conversion I have ever seen, from being an abuser of his family to being the most lamb-like creature I'd ever seen in my life, to see the change in him. When I received my first doctorate, I'll never forget him coming and sitting in the front row and just staring at me saying, is this really my son? What happened? I just kept telling him, Dad, this has nothing to do with new intelligence or new brains or anything like that. It has everything to do with a new heart and a new desire to live and a new hope. And that new heart only Christ is capable of giving to you and to me. And I look across the terrain of America today, we are lost, totally lost. We have no source of definitions anymore. And I do the university campuses. Air Force Academy not too long ago, I'm trying to remember if you were with me at that, Thomas, yes. Thomas with me at the Air Force Academy, travels with me everywhere we go. They were supposed to be reporting back to their rooms, and they were getting special permission to stand in line, ask their questions. And one senior, about to just go on a great career, he just looked at me and he said, how do you get to this point in your life? How do you come to know? I said, explain your question. He said, I just don't know if I've got it all together yet. How do you come to know? Well, you come to know by realizing there are existentially undeniable realities in life. Those undeniable realities is that the core of your hunger and mine is love. And the answer is in relationships. And you cannot define earthly relationships until you find your relationship with your Heavenly Father. And so Lee Iacocca said, here I am at the tail end of my life, still trying to figure out what it's all about. He said, and I look at my children and then I say, maybe that's what it's all about. He was on the right track. Relationship. And that relationship that defines all relationships is your relationship with God. Secularism is a nominally accepted worldview. If we are not careful with its dangers, we will wipe God out. Pluralization works well in culture, but if we think it means relativism, we will wipe morality out. Privatization, that you have to keep your faith parked at home and go out into public without it, we will wipe meaning out. No shame, no reason, no meaning. That's where we have ended up from the cultural upheaval that took place in the 60s. My friend Trevor was asking me how many days I do on the road a year. I hate to tell you this, it's over 200. I'm not proud of it. I do it for only one reason. And we turn down 99% of our invitations. And my wife tells me we'll have heaven to enjoy this time. The world needs a voice now. Be where you need to be. Come back home as quickly as you can. We need answers. And there is no way to find answers until we founded in that relationship with Christ Himself, the way, the truth, and the life, who answers questions as no one else does, with coherence and with specific points of relevance and truth. Thank you for giving me your attention. And I'm just going to ask you to bow your heads in prayer with me. You've given me so much of your time, and I'm honored. And I'm just going to ask you to do this. It's my privilege to see this happen all over the globe. And in the silence of where you are seated, if this is your moment to say, Lord Jesus, I need you. Help me to know you. Why don't you do it now? Just quietly in your own heart. Just quietly in your own heart. Or you can say, Jesus, I don't know if you're really who you claim to be. I'm willing to believe if you'll reveal yourself to me. I will begin my journey in truth if you'll reveal yourself to me. Please. Or you wandered far away from having once claimed to follow Him. See a moment to return. I'm going to be quiet for about a minute or two. You deal with God. Father, I thank you for this beautiful state of Hawaii. For a few places in the world any more beautiful than this. You have put a little bit of Eden in this place. And yet, as always, no matter how much we are surrounded by beauty, the darkness can still be within. You reminded us of that so much. I thank you for these men and women in politics, in law, in the judiciary, in a tough life, in a tough time. How much we need a law above our laws. How much we need to know how to stand before you, our eternal judge. How much we need you, our advocate, who will represent us in our salvation. Thank you for these men and women who have taken time, and everyone here somehow connected with that discipline. Let some walk out of here different to what they walked in. Bless this state, its young people, its homes, its leaders, its educators. Who knows, Lord, you can turn a country around by turning an individual around, even this day. Thank you for giving me the honor of speaking here in the name of our Lord and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thought-provoking, I hope, to all of us. Thank you all very much for coming. You are dismissed. We are at 1:30. Please feel free to go. If anybody would like to stay, it will just be another 5 or so minutes. Dr. Zacharias will take some questions. If you have a question and you'd like to stand and be recognized, please.
My question is in regards to evolution. Many people, especially in the academic world, they're embracing both evolution and biblical account of creation. People like Dinesh D'Souza, even your friend Francis Collins, I think in his book The Language of God, he has a whole chapter devoted to evolution being our origin. I don't remember which college setting you were at, but I thought I heard you that you seemed to concur with one of your colleagues on your team that evolution, or at least partial aspects of it, weren't true. Did I mishear you on how you can reconcile evolution with God creating man in his image?
Fair enough. I appreciate that. I don't know if you've all heard it, the question of evolution. Dinesh D'Souza has gone that route, and also Francis Collins, whom I know personally, and we've chatted about it, and many other famed scientists in the academia. You may think I'm dodging the question. I'm not. Let me tell you what is important in responding to that question. The importance of this question is that I think we misplace the value of two distinct aspects to the question. If we start debating the processes that have been involved in the process of time, we lose our way and miss the more important question is, was it agency or was it chance? Was it by design and a personal, moral, real first cause, or did we just explode into being? If we take the second aspect of it, of processes, we end up debating and batting our head against a wall and accomplishing absolutely nothing, because we are taking two contrary disciplines and trying to bring about their starting points, which are so different, into a common answer, which I don't think is really solvable. Let me say about evolution, first of all, why I think what they assume is not even accepted by the finest of scientists. You take Sir Frederick Hoyle and Chandra Vikramasinghe. Have you got my folder here? Let me read for you a statement by Chandra Vikramasinghe, who was a professor at Cardiff in Wales, and Sir Frederick Hoyle, the astronomer, at Cambridge. they two joined together in a research on human origins, and it was published by Chandra Vikramasinghe as a Buddhist, and Sir Frederick Hoyle, a skeptic and a naturalist. And at the end of it, here's what they both said in a statement. It is a very important here. Here's what he says in the book, The Intelligence Universe, page 242. Life could not have originated here on Earth, nor does it look as though biological evolution can be explained from within an earthbound theory of life. Genes from outside the Earth are needed to drive this evolutionary process. This much can be consolidated by strictly scientific means, by experience, observation, and calculation. Why did they say that? In calculating the odds that all the functional proteins necessary for life might form in one place by random events, they came up with the figure of 1 in a chance of 10 to 40,000. And since there are only 10 to the 80th power atoms in the entire universe, they concluded, quote, it is an outrageously small probability that could not be faced even if the whole universe comprised of organic soup, in their book Evolution from Space. So you know what they say? Since you cannot explain the evolution from a starting point in an earthbound theory, he said the only way to get out of this, says Vikramasinghe, is to posit the panspermian theory, that sperms from another planet or spores were brought to seed the Earth. And Francis Crick, who got the Nobel Prize for DNA, for cracking the code of the DNA, he said maybe a spaceship or something brought these spores from another planet to seed the Earth, and that's how it got all this going. What they are really saying is there is no earthbound explanation for the origin of life, and it is a mathematical impossibility, says Vikramasinghe and the astronomer Hoyle. So we are dealing with an agnostic position on starting. That's where I think we need to be focusing. My debate with these people is not, I said, look, we can go down here, you physicists and you astronomers disagree by about 3 billion years on the origin. I said, we can stand here debating all this. What I'm just saying to you is, explain to me with chemistry and physics and the knowledge of science that this thing spontaneously happened and exploded into being, and here we are. That's where I want to debate with you, because I believe it is impossible without a creator. Once you posit a creator, then the miracle is also explainable and plausible. So I don't go to the sequence of the process, I go to the origin, and that's where I think the debating point is. That's my answer to you. And otherwise, you know what happens? You can be, let me give you one more illustration, then I'll close with this. I was asked a very thorny question at one of the universities. It was on certain lifestyle preferences. And I knew what they're trying to do. They're trying with that one question to silence you on everything else. Okay, if you have a certain position on that issue, they silence you on everything else. So I said, I'll answer your question if you will first answer mine. I said there are 3 types of cultures. There's a theonomous, heteronomous, and autonomous. Theonomous culture believes God's law is written in our hearts. We used to call it natural law. Heteronomous, where a few dictate it for the many. In Islam, Islam is a heteronomous culture. In Saudi Arabia and in Iran, the mullahs at the top dictate it for the mass. It's a heteros, other, nomos law. There's a theonomous, God's law is supposed to be in our hearts. Once upon a time we talked natural law, we don't talk that much natural law anymore. The average American doesn't believe in natural law. They don't believe in heteronomous theory because they don't want the few at the top to dictate it for all of us. And the man standing in front of me agreed. I said, so what's left? I said autonomous. Autos meaning self, nomos meaning law. Each person has the right to dictate for themselves. Is that what America is? He said, yes. I said, all right, then I have a question for you. Since we're autonomous, will you give me the privilege of my autonomy in defining my position on this issue you've raised? Or as soon as I give you my position, will you switch to a heteronomous process and enforce yours upon mine and take away the autonomy that you just gave me and give me the moment to answer the question? I said, is this a bait and switch question? He was silent. I think the same applies with the theory of origins. If you get bogged down in the processes, what really happens is you lose the real issue of what the question ought to be. And here too, we bait and switch, and we destroy the person. And you know what happens? If you answer that question wrongly on a university campus, they debunk everything else that you believe. And I don't know if that's the battle where you want to lay down your life. You go to a battle zone where you can still be triumphant and allow for the supernatural, and then everything else follows. If you try to win the battle on the second link there, I don't think you win it at all. So that's why I don't fight that battle. I think it is pointless. You have to go to origins. Evolution is not a theory of origins.